Cheers.
Cheers.
Is there any more coffee in that?
A little bit. Just
Okay.
enough, you know?
Can we just get started with this is Ryan Fila. I'm going to let him introduce himself. Go on ahead.
I'm Ryan Fila. This is a good practice. Honestly, I would say right now the introduction would be I'm focused on creating spaces of intentional connection in Denver specifically to start in my home city and then expand it from there, being in sober dinner experiences, workshops, and other creative storytelling avenues.
Yes, so I know one of the things that you do in Denver right now is you host something called Dynamic Dinner, and it's centered around essentially just human connection. From my gathering, that the food brings the people there, they stay for the connection, and kind of to foster that environment outside of just partying almost, or just, hey, let's go, instead of drinking being the main event, the other person is the main event, the community is the main event. You know, I do want to hear a little bit more about that event and what happens inside those events.
Yeah, I think you said it well. Food's the excuse. The food is the excuse to gather, and putting words to the rest has been the challenge. Where it's like this is what people are coming for. It's the
Yeah.
feeling that people leave with. Being able to label what that feeling really is difficult because it's not community in my judgment. When I first started hosting these, I was like, man, is it possible to create a business, create something that is based on the essence of the people in the room, based on creating community? And I was like, of course it is. 10 months in, I was like, I think that was naive. And I think really what we're offering is a game, is rules to a game in a night that attract people with certain values, with certain things that they want in relationship. They build community as a side. It's always a byproduct. People come because they see, oh, this is an intentional evening focused around like deeper questions, healthy food, sober environment, and then they make friends. So it's been a dance.
What got you to do something like this? What got you to put in the effort, the time, the emotional effort to get this all together, to get people to meet together, to connect, or to just let it be and see what happens, right?
Yeah, the long answer is I think it's been a lifetime. I was a travel content creator before this. I found what I was actually fascinated with in traveling the world was that I think humans were all dropped into this place that doesn't really make sense. There are really no rules in my judgment. The before and after is the great unknown, and we're said, go live it. Like, go do the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was traveling, I nearly became obsessed with seeing how other parts of the world, other cultures, other people are then living. That's what I love about travel. So when I came back to Denver, there was an aspect of me that was curious about how are we living and what does that look like to bring differences into the same room and connect through the differences. The short answer is what Dynamic Dinner was created through pain and confusion, and then service. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was back in a place. I just came back from Ukraine and Mexico. I was like literally in a war zone filming, and was like, oh, I'm so close. There's something here, but this isn't quite it. And I went home, and then I was like, okay, maybe if I change up the way I'm creating just a little bit, like maybe the shoe will fit. So I went to Mexico for 6 weeks and then came back and I was like, damn, it's close. And then I deleted everything. I deleted all my TikTok, my Instagram, which at the time was probably 70,000 followers in total. And was like, what next? Like, what are we really doing? I have to face this dance with wanting to be famous. Like, there's really something deep here. Okay, let's face that. And then what? And I was taking a lot of baths,
Mm-hmm.
crying.
I'm a bath taker.
Yo, baths were the savior about a year ago. And it was probably 6 weeks where I kept hearing like that internal voice, spirit, whatever we label it. That was like becoming dynamic. You know what this means to you. Set up a dinner around it. And I was like, a dinner? I was like, I just got back from a war zone filming. And you want me to like do this little dinner? I was like, okay. And it was the first time I had put something together that I wasn't married to the next one, like the outcome. I called 20 friends. I said, hey, you want to come over and do this thing? That was it. They came and it snowballed literally from there.
It's beautiful. I do want to talk more about Ukraine later, but right now I want to go back into your childhood, and who was Ryan as a kid, and what was that like for you? What was your relationship like with your parents growing up, with your mom, with your dad? What did you learn from them? What do you still carry with you that you learned from them?
This is great practice. I'm in relearning to actually reframe. Be like, what was the gift? I was so blessed as a kid. My mom has this attitude of, are we cursing on here?
Yeah.
My mom literally is the epitome of like, I don't give a fuck, in my judgment. And the amount of that I got to witness as a kid, and her with like separating from her family and going to prison and losing her kids, but still showing up as herself, has been such a gift. And my dad was so light. Like he was the life of the party energy. And getting to watch that in rooms and in family gatherings, although there's the shadow and the edge to it, but I learned a lot of that and am myself because of a lot of that. On the flip side of the coin, my mom was addicted to meth, went to jail and prison a few different times. We bounced back and forth in custody. My parents were never married. I was an accident. My dad he was in like a gnarly shame alcohol cycle between falling and then getting clean and getting into religion and then getting baptized and then falling, and ended up killing himself when I was 20. So there was, a lot of instability at the same time. But truly, wouldn't be the person that I am today without that, and having the level of independence that gifted me. Like I've been on my own since I was, in my mind, like 7.
So how did you navigate that chaos as a child going through it? I know as a child, like where there's a not knowing, right? Not knowing the severity of what's happening, but you feel it though. You feel the dysfunction, and how did you deal with that dysfunction, or how did you cope with that?
Yeah, my immediate answer is I took control. That was a lot of my defense mechanism and safety. Was like, okay, nobody's got me, I got me. That type of attitude anyways. I have, he's not gone. I still have a younger brother. And becoming like a parent energy was the way that I approached a lot of it. It was like, okay, how can I hold this household together? How can I be the bridge between mom and dad? How can I take care of my younger brother? And how can I hold the house together? That was the way I turned.
What were your dreams as a kid, even through all that?
To play football. Yeah. I wanted to play professional football. Which has been another whole dance in and of itself.
I also know that your father tragically took his own life, and I know that I have a cousin who hung himself, and I know that fucks you up. It takes you for a spin, and it's something that's very hard to cope with. And my cousin, we're cousins, so there's a distance there, right?
Hmm.
So I don't equate that with a father and a son. My cousin, we weren't hanging around every day, stuff like that. I got to see on the periphery the effect that it had on my aunt, on the brothers and sisters, and it's devastating. Um, but even from the periphery, I had to find a way to reconcile that within myself, not to make sense of it, but to reconcile it within
Mm.
myself. Um, and I think sharing stories, I do use that. It is part of what I do, but how did you reconcile that into at least a not negative way?
Yeah. One of I love how you like stated that at the end in a not negative way. One of the I would say how do I want to word this? One of the gifts that I've cultivated naturally had, I'm not fully sure, but it's been this quick alchemy of negative experiences turning it into positive. Whether it's like fully embodied or not is kind of aside. But when my dad died, almost the first, I will never forget it. I was flying back from North Dakota to Denver when I got the call, or after I got the call. And on the flight, I almost immediately started like writing a inspirational message for his eulogy in my mind. Like, how could we transition this to be something positive? Was definitely not going fully into the emotions of it all yet, but it was that transition. And with this case with my dad, I did that. Then I had years of like my own processing. I traveled around the country, lived in his truck, spoke to high schools and colleges about responding to adversity, trying to turn my pain into a gift, like trying to turn pain into offering.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I through that process was peeling the onion back on my actual pain and my actual emotions. And then probably about 5 years ish later, I realized that a big piece of what I was doing, or a big piece of what had happened, was this narrative of independence that I was even talking about before was really nailed into the coffin with my dad. I was like, I'm good. I'm always good. I've been raising myself forever. And then my dad decides life isn't worth living. And I'm like, oh, I definitely got me. Like, I don't need anybody. And then it started to play out in other relationships, like intimate partnerships, which gave me another opportunity to heal. So it's been a continual unwinding and then using what I actually learned is underneath that in alchemy to offer back. So I'm sure there's something, even with these dinners, I didn't realize probably till 6 or 8 months in that creating a room like that is probably something I'm doing out of, wow, I wish my dad was here. Like, I wish this existed, because then he may have not. Like, there's continual unraveling with that.
How do you honor I would venture to say the events that you do, and I think the way you live your life is the way you honor your father. Um, that may not be the answer though. So how do you honor the passing of your father? Like, and how does that feel to know that you're honoring him by how you're living?
Wow. I almost don't even know how to answer that. I feel like it's not even been a focus, to be honest. I feel like I'm in such a place of trying to hear what my truth is that I'm not focused on honoring somebody else. I love my dad. I have so much empathy and appreciation for him and the fact that he's my father in this life. And I don't feel like consciously I'm like, how's this honoring my dad? It was almost a background thing that in the last year I was like, oh, I think I'm doing that. Like I think I'm honoring him
Just
by
by
one,
living.
yeah, by living my truth and whatever the definition is, but offering something that would be of benefit to him.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
think.
great, wow, that's a great realization though. I think I'm honoring him by living my truth.
Yeah, I think. Obviously, that's for you to sort out, right? I think
Yeah,
as humans, we're dynamic. We're doing a lot of things subconsciously, and when you're doing something that's subconsciously good and positive, even if you don't know it, like this is just, it is embodied, right? It is embodied at this point when you're no longer thinking about it. That that's when I think the magic happens in whatever you're doing in life, and it just kind of flows through you. I know for me, I've shared stories all across the U.S. I went to Poland to the border, not into Ukraine. My girl came with me. Um, and I remember I had thought about going to Ukraine, and I had to really think about it. And this is before my girl decided to come with me. We went
naturally.
to the I think it's pronounced Shemishel,
Mm-hmm.
or right, kind of,
Shimsha.
yeah, yeah, right by Lviv. So we went over there and we volunteered over there for a couple of days. Met some great people. Um, but the idea of going into Ukraine, I was split on it. Am I gonna go? Like, and from my understanding, Lviv is generally safe, and but still, there's that chance. You don't know what might happen. It is a great unknown. Even if there is everyone who's coming across the border is telling, yeah, it's generally safe. Don't worry about it. I have cousins there. You want to go? My cousin will meet you over there. Um, but as I was thinking about it, and I'd called my brother too before the trip, and I said, yeah, I might just go to Ukraine while I'm out there. And he kind of smiled, he kind of smirked. And my brother lost both his legs in Afghanistan, and he's like, I already fought my war. If that's what you want to do, more power to you. But he also said, there's people who need their stories told all over the world. Like there's people who need their stories told here. Why go into that war zone, essentially? And I really did think about it. I was like, man, why do I want to go? There is that level because it's hot, it's popping, right? This is what's hot right now. This is where the attention's at. It's exciting. But then I was like, if I go over there and on the off chance that something does happen and I'm in a Ukrainian jail or I'm in some sort of issue, would I be sitting there thinking in my heart, this was worth it? And once I asked myself that question, I was like, I would be very upset because I did my time in prison. I went in prison I got a 5-year sentence when I was 18, and violence has been recurring throughout more than half of my life. I was like, man, I would regret it because I feel like I have something to live for at this point.
Hmm.
And when me and Molly were over there, it was even more like, you know what, we have no business going over there. So we didn't go. And we kind of vacationed a little bit in Europe after that. Um, but we volunteered on the border, and we were of service while we were there. But I'll never forget that thought process of me thinking, sitting down, like, do I really want to risk it? Do I have will this be worth it for me? And my answer was no. So what's fascinating to me, I don't know what your thought process was, but your answer was yes.
Hmm.
And your answer was yes to take that risk into a great unknown. And once you cross that border, you're not in the safety of the laws of the Western world. Like you're just there, right? Um, and I wanted to know what was your actual, and I've watched some videos about it, but what was your thought process of like pulling the trigger, and going over there and putting yourself in real harm's way?
Yeah, the what you probably saw in the videos is there was a internal inclination. When I went to Haiti, it was the same thing. I saw the earthquake happening, and I was on the airport floor in DIA, and something inside was like, "Go." I was like, "Okay." And then the same thing when the news started coming up and was cycling about Ukraine, the same voice came through, and I was like, "Yeah, but this seems a little different." Now, being here, looking backwards, I think that voice was a few different things. I think one, it is this internal guide inside of me. Two, I think I love the chaos. It was hot. It was something it was shiny. And I really wanted to tell the micro stories on the ground. There were 40 million stories unfolding at a heightened level in this explosive item in human history that I get to be alive for. Before it could have been World War II, or it could, like, name it. It's also always happening in other places that we don't see, but this is one that I saw. And I was 24, and was like, what do I have to lose? you know? And I'm sure there was an aspect of, look at me, like I'm doing this. This is extreme. I want to be seen in that. So it was a combination of all of it, truly. But when I look back, the moment that really sticks out was when I had finally made it across the border, probably about a half an hour in, and it was silent inside of my own mind. That was when I knew I had made the right decision for me. It was like, this is where you're supposed to be. It's the same feeling, at least for me, that when I'm doing something so intense that I have to be there, or I could die. Like driving a motorcycle or whatever, fill it in. This just happened to be telling stories in a war zone.
How was that experience for you?
It changed the way I look at humanity forever. Truly. The amount of things that we think we know about and have an opinion on is absurd. The most noise I heard in that entire trip was before I ever even got there by Americans who also think they knew what was happening. I was at the border between Poland and Ukraine, and two people could tell me different things. I was like, I'm literally here.
Yeah.
And I was like, can I cross? One person's like, yeah, it's normal crossing. Ask somebody else, they're like, no, you can't cross at all. I'm like, how do we not know? Let alone what's happening inside of the country. And honestly, the real foundational shift for me that happened while I was over there was how humans come together and connect in times of absolute chaos. Some background on the story, David took the grand piano over to play at the train station, and then after we didn't have a place to stay, there was a 10 p.m. curfew. I didn't want to get found in my car with camera equipment sleeping on the streets. Like, that wasn't the way I wanted to go out. So we ended up driving down into what we thought was a coffee shop, ends up being like a whole rec center that they had turned into a refugee camp. And we're like, oh, sorry, like we were looking for Wi-Fi so we could find a place to stay. And the guys are like, no, like stay, we'll get you SIM cards. They let us park there, and I slept in my car a few nights, slept inside when there was some space. But watching the way that the little shit didn't matter anymore
Mm.
because life was being threatened shows me that it's possible to connect like that. It's possible to connect through the differences. Sometimes it just takes a war for us to see that.
Explain that deeper connection you're talking about.
To me, it's the connection of like, oh, you're human. Like, we are the same. For them at the time, it was, we're Ukrainians, or we're getting bombed. It's almost like the concept of the fine line between trauma bonding and bonding through hard stuff. Like, we're together in this. But it felt so big that it was the baseline of, oh, we're human. I see you. Even if, like, your auntie did this to my family, like, none of that shit matters. Because your auntie's getting bombed just like my auntie's getting bombed.
How do you define love?
I think it's changing. For me, it's becoming a feeling, like an essence. If there were words that I could put to it, it would be commitment and sacrifice, maybe. But I don't think words really encapsulate what my definition of love is becoming.
Do you remember what your first love was? It can be a person, place, or thing, or hobby.
The first thing that comes to mind is sport. I feel like sport was my first love because it gave me a space to be myself that didn't need an explanation. It didn't need an asterisk, that it didn't even have a response. It was really just me. And it made me feel safe.
What inspires you?
What inspires me? It feels like two prongs. It feels like everything when I'm really open. Like the paintings in here could inspire me. Just simply putting a camera down and saying, what do you have to say, can inspire me. And more recently, I'm cutting basically everything out that isn't on mission or bringing me closer to the life and person that I want to be, to intentionally place the things in front of me that I want to be inspired by, and quieting the rest because I'm so easily distractible. That's people who are creating connection. That's people who are telling stories well. That's people who are building something in this life that's sustainable. It's humor. It's yeah.
How do you?
Essence.
That's a great answer. I want to know your thoughts on. I know you saw what connection can be like when you were in Ukraine. I'm sure you see what connection can be like when you have your events. What can you envision what connection can be like for the world at large?
The same. Truly. I think that's why what I'm doing is an anomaly. This is the simplicity. And I overcomplicate it with all these other concepts and frameworks and conversation pieces and agendas. That's not what connection really is. Connection isn't DEI. Connection is doing the thing. We can use frameworks and we can be creative with how we're bringing this into larger corporations and spaces and politics. But when it comes down to it, it's the conversation. I was thinking about this. Actually, this is like unrelated, but we'll get there. I was walking the streets in this all red jumpsuit. And I was like, man, if I was in the wrong area,
Yeah.
like this says something. And somebody could definitely be like, run it. And
Would you run it?
I mean, let's talk about scenario, but probably, like, I would probably run it because it's not worth it. And what I was thinking in that moment is, man, it'd be so interesting to be watching a podcast or like conversation on connection around these things and like how somebody could frame it as like, man, that's too bad. Like, it doesn't have to be like that. It's not like, who thinks they can own colors? Who, like, what area? And then I'm like, yeah, that's cool until you're in the street on the corner with the dude telling you to run it. And like, it's the same thought with connection. Mm-hmm. Like, we can be all up here and doing the conversations and the structuring, but it's a different game when you're in the room, when you're on the street corner, doing the thing. Both are important. But I think that's really where it happens. It happens with the backpacker that's walking the streets in Peru. It happens with the woman who is cooking in the window and sees somebody outside that's different than them and sparks a conversation. How do we create more simplicity?
So connection is simple.
It's not easy, but it's simple.
It's not transactional. I think, which is what I've gathered, which is what I've seen. It's in this world, everything is monetized. You know, you talked about somebody owning a color. People want to own monetized connection. This is their brand of connection, and here's the price to connect. And I think what you see in that war zone that you were at was just people being people. You know, everyone had a common arc in their story with the war and where they're at, and they meet and they connect on an emotional level just by being there, because there's a similarity that is understood overtly that's being shared, which is the situation. And we're all sharing a similar situation. We just don't care about how you're feeling the situation, or how's this person feeling what we're kind of all going through, because we have overarching themes here too, whether that be micro or macro, what's going on in your community or what's going on in the nation, and then, you know, the world, because there's a survival element to it as well that you kind of got to try and, in this over here where we're at, you kind of got to get that out and then just let people be people. And it is so simple, right? But maybe it's not. Maybe people have traumas that hinder them from,
for sure,
having a connection to themselves and to others. You know, like, we wish this to be so simple, but when we've been formed by our experiences in the world, there's levels of us that we don't let others ever see. And what you do have to create is an environment where people do feel safe. And I do think you're doing that with your events. So kudos to you.
And that's where I think it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's real. It's messy, but it feels like the framework is so simple.
Create the environment. facilitate the environment.
And it's fascinating. You even talk about monetization of it, because that's been a part of my dance in the last year.
It's such a dance.
It really is.
It really
And
is.
truthfully, the more I get into it, the more I find that it's even more difficult than I thought. I mean, we're talking about large companies in the United States, like Soho House being upside down because they can't make money that's enough to stay alive. There are organizations here in Denver that create connection and create social hubs that are either not making money, they don't need to because the people owning them don't need the money, or they just transitioned and real estate doesn't offset the cost or is too expensive that membership can't offset the cost. Like, it's a really nuanced business. And that's partially where I also came back to earlier, is that I don't tell people anymore that dynamic dinner, they'll get community at dynamic dinner, because I think that's fraudulent. This is what we offer. And I think you can meet soul family in the room, but we don't offer that. Okay, that's hard. It's hard.
Very hard. And you know, I've been sharing stories for 5 years, and it's cost me and my brother a small fortune. You know, I think things like this are initially and primarily led by passion, and it's what keeps it going. The monetization, you know, I'm doing a talking event that I'm putting together. It's always been weird, you know. How do you say, hey, or in the wellness field to begin with, right? Or the coaching world, or like, hey, I can help you have a better life for this amount of money. Like, wouldn't you want to do that for free? That's the thing. We would do it for free, and we have done it for free. And me, I'm going to share stories. You know, part of what I do is sharing stories for free regardless. So it's just built in how we do things, and we've always wanted it that way. But to put a price on something like spiritual that you really can't quantify is where I'm getting at. And it's also not guaranteed. You
For
know, it's also not guaranteed. So the way you price it is just like you focus on the tangible thing you do offer and what you are offering at your events. And it's the food, it's the setting, it's the atmosphere. But the thing that's priceless is what happens within those events that you can't put a price on.
Right.
And you're not putting a price on those things. You're like, hey, come and find out. Come pay for this dinner. You know what I mean? I know $50. I spend $80 at dinner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it's me and somebody else, 150. You know, like, this isn't. Why not go to dinner and meet some people who are open to really connect? You know. So I love the way you've been able to do that and do that dance. So I know it's not an easy one. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No. No, not unless you have other questions or other rabbit holes you want to get into.
I don't. Is there? I don't think so. I mean, we talked about, from everything I've watched. You know what? There's another one. I actually watched one of your videos where you talked about your break from social media, and you had to search within yourself, like, what's next? What are you doing next? And that space that you were in. I want to know more. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know the time frame you're talking about. I'm not sure which video this is.
Yeah. There's right.
Was it on Instagram?
YouTube. This was a YouTube video. But yeah, you were just talking about, like, hey, you've done this, and you kind of touched on it a little bit here. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Are you closer to that answer now?
I am. There's I was actually listening to a Kevin Gates video the other day, and I feel like he really struck a chord. He said, when a man meets his mission, he actually marries that mission and they become one. And I feel like that's happening, where I don't have words for it quite yet. I have a mission statement, which is I choose to serve a life of connection, creation, and leadership from an essence of more love than fear. And what that looks like is coming more and more alive because I'm being more consistent. Consistency has always been my crux outside of football, which is like the only thing that if I really look back on was like the thing. I was a football player all the way through college. And then that's severed, and I feel like I've been at sea kind of ever since, trying this, figure it like a lot of things that were close. And I'm walking into a season right now that's like, oh, this is where we're going. I can't see the path, but I know it's mine because I can't see it. Because there aren't footsteps that are already here. And that's bringing me a lot of clarity.
Let's talk about fears real quick. What are your fears?
Death.
Why?
Because I'm out of control of it. I feel like I'm out of control of it. I had a psychedelic experience where I actually experienced my own suicide.
Ooh.
I was like, I can't live here anymore. And I feel like this was a lot of alchemy with my dad, actually.
When was this psychedelic experience? How long ago?
This was November of 2022, about a year and a half ago, right before, like basically the start of the darkest season of my life. And there's nobody that will ever be able to tell me I didn't live this life twice. Like I didn't get a full death rebirth opportunity. And
so you've been born again.
Yeah, I feel like I've actually been born again.
Yeah.
In the bathtub.
Yeah, you baptized yourself.
It was crazy. We could do the whole story, but yeah, it was crazy.
So this psychedelic experience happened in the bathtub.
The end of it.
The end of it.
Yeah. I felt like I thought I was stuck. And I was like, what happened was, it's important for the fear aspect, is basically through a bunch of experiences of being washed through the spectrums. This is like really hard to follow. Basically, I see life on all sorts of spectrums. This is where becoming dynamic came from. It was like everything I experienced in this life is on an opposition spectrum, which I think is closer than we think, but that's for another podcast. Happiness, sadness, city, nature, introvert, extrovert. And I was washing back and forth in my experience through the psychedelic journey. And I was at a point where I was like, I'm coming back. We're like 5 or 6 hours into this. And 3 or 4 interactions happened where I was like, oh my God, we are the same with other human beings, with my partner, it was mainly my partner at the time. She was like wearing my sweatpants, and all I could do when we were talking was like, oh my God, we're the same. She was eating a bite of salad, I remember, and I was like, oh my God, we are all the same. Like this salad. We go for a walk. We're coming back. We walk back into the apartment, and I was like, okay, we're coming back. I get in, and I was like, fuck, I am not back. And I looked down, and I remember seeing this circular light, and then looking back up and just seeing my apartment. And like, it was like the veil between human and spirit actually split apart. And it was in that moment where I was like, I can't do this. I thought I was stuck. Like, this was my new experience as a human being. And I was like, I can't do that. I have to die because I can't live this. So I ran a bath, took all my clothes off, came back around, saw my partner in the kitchen, and was like, man, life and death, they both have to happen, huh? And what I heard her say at the time was, yeah, and I feel like what my work here to do, because she's a facilitator, she was like, I feel like my job here is to help facilitate people to their death, is what I heard. We revisited later. That's not exactly what she said, but that's what I heard. So I turned back around into the bathtub. as my grave. That's why I was pulling it. I was like, this is where I die. And I got in the bathtub, fully surrendered to death and blacked out. And the next thing I know, she's like coming in with cookies and like the candle, and she was like, are you all right? And when I woke up, I was finally back.
You said you had an image within that experience that you had took in your own life?
I mean, I didn't have an image. I was doing it. I was getting in the bathtub to commit my suicide. Not with a gun, not with like, but I was like, I die here. I'm going to lay down in this bathtub and this is it.
Mm-hmm.
And just blacked out. And it was like, that's it. Like I had fully let go of life itself. And almost every aspect of my internal work now pulls the thread to that moment of like, how could you let me see this? I'm afraid of dying. Whether it's I'm in a rush, or I want more caffeine because I'm not going to get all the things done because I don't have enough time because I'm going to die. Mm-hmm. Like every strand nearly that I pull now is because I'm afraid of dying. So even if I said like I'm afraid of my partner leaving me, or I'm afraid of my mom passing, or I'm afraid of not living my purpose.
Yeah, from this experience, this would be the scariest.
That's it. It's the root.
When you let go, did you, right before you get in the bathtub, and this is symbolic, right, of you like, I'm just letting go, did that at least feel any sort of like release or peaceful, or was it just like a rush for the psychedelic experience to finish, or?
Yeah, it felt like a peace right before. And really what it felt like was the most intense pain and fear I'd ever experienced. It made, when I got the phone call about my dad, feel like child's play, like my emotions. I'd never been that terrified in my life. And I was like, this, like letting go of life. And then as I got in the bathtub, it was like, okay.
That's intense.
Yeah.
That's intense.
I would be surprised if it's not the most intense experience I have in my entire life.
That's intense. Wow. Yeah, so what does that motivate you to do now?
Live. Like, truly. Yeah, live. Like, what are we talking about? You know? A big statement I come back to often is, what the fuck are we talking about? Like, all of this that happens up here. I'm like, people could talk about the sweatsuit, or like, what do you look like, or how does this like thing? I'm like, what are we talking about? If we're not talking about the real shit, then I'm gonna die. So like, I'm gonna go somewhere else because I got life to live.
I'm not, I'm not afraid of death. But I want to live, which is why I didn't go to Ukraine. So maybe you're not as afraid of death as you think you are, right? Yeah. What do the facts say?
Yeah.
But I do have some fears, and I think they're healthy fears. One of my biggest fears is, and I don't look; they're in the rearview mirror, but they're there. What my gaze is forward. But there's that fire behind, and one of my biggest fears, is going back into active addiction and just being drunk on the corner somewhere. Like, it's terrifying. That terrifies me. And I didn't have a psychedelic experience in my life, but I have definitely had a spiritual one. And I felt connected. I felt loved. We had talked about this on the phone. And when I hear people talk about their positive psychedelic experiences, it sounds a lot like when I had, my spiritual experience. But I also had when I was deeply depressed, I had this recurring image of just me on the street with a bottle, just beat. Like, this is what's in store for me. it was so disturbing, and I had it for a long time, like over a year, where it's just like it's there. And now, and people, the interesting thing is, I know you've had a difficult life, and I think hopefully this counts for you too. When you've had difficult lives, when the odds are against you, um, people will tell you, hey, this is what's in store for you. Like, this is more than your future is more likely than not going to be, it's going to be this way. They never tell you, and that shit's fucked up. I'll tell you, you're going to end up in, and somebody had told me when I was a teenager, hey, you're going to end up in prison, which I did. Right? But how come nobody's telling me, like, hey, you might end up here. You might end up pursuing all your dreams, which is why I'm big on dreams. You might end up pursuing the best aspects of yourself in this life, and helping people, and your life will be beautiful. Instead, when you come up with the odds against you, whether that be trauma, whether that be broken homes, or whatever the scenario is, it's like, hey, more than likely, like, you're going to struggle. More than likely, we wouldn't be surprised if you did end up on the street. We would know. And I get emotional when I say that because, this reminds me of my depression, of my deep depression. I've prayed to God that I never want to forget how that felt like, because I can contrast it to where I was and where I am on an emotional level. And that's where I was at when I was deeply depressed. Like, man, this is it for me. And, when my life began to change, one of the things that I told myself, if this reality, this stark negative reality of me being drunk on the street, an addict, an ex-con, a criminal, if this is so likely for me, why not the opposite can be so likely for me? That's where I keep my gaze at. Like, yeah, these things, yeah, they're true. They're not lying. But I think what's on the other side is just as true as well. And it's where I aim towards, and where I walk, where I set my spirit to, and and it's worked for me, with the understanding, like, hey, this is a possibility for you still. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's just wisdom. It's just being older. Like, I don't deny the fact, like, who's to say I grab a drink and everything goes to shit, But I like to keep my eyes on, like, on what's good, what's possible. And right now I've been sharing stories for 5 years, on my side. It's kind of like, it's more murkier now, which requires more faith. It's more, the steps aren't the steps that I've set out for myself now. I've done the steps that I've set out for myself. Now it's like, okay, I'm just going. It's a little bit funner that way, But yeah, so that was just talking about fears. And, though mine isn't death, mine is like a horrible life. That's a fear of mine. Like being dead while being here. But luckily, that's not where we're at.
I like the way you said that. A living death.
So yeah, man, I think that wraps it up for me. Thanks for listening to me talk.
Thanks for sharing.
I appreciate everything you shared and everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me in.
Yeah.
It's good to meet in person.
Yeah.